The richest man in the city decided to dress like a beggar. Not for charity, not for fun, but to answer one painful question. Did his son's girlfriend truly love him, or was she secretly waiting for his fortune? What he discovered during that test would change many lives forever. Before the story begins, make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss powerful motivational stories that can inspire your life. Jonathan Sterling built his empire from nothing. 40 years earlier he had arrived in New York with only 2 shirts, a pair of worn shoes, and a stubborn determination that refused to break. He worked nights unloading cargo at the shipping docks, slept in a tiny rented room, and spent his free time studying business books in the public library. While others relaxed after work, Jonathan studied markets, investments, and leadership. Slowly, opportunity began to appear. He started with small investments, then a small logistics company, and eventually expanded into real estate, hotels, technology firms, and shipping lines. By the time he reached 65 years old, Jonathan Sterling had become one of the most powerful billionaires in the country. Newspapers often called him the Iron Builder because of his discipline and relentless ambition. Yet despite the money, the private jets, and the luxury estates, Jonathan believed one principle mattered more than anything else: character. Money could build a company, but character built a legacy. This belief shaped the way he raised his only son, Michael Sterling. Michael was 30 years old and had grown up in a world completely different from his father's early struggles. He attended excellent schools, traveled the world during vacations, and lived comfortably. Still, Jonathan made sure his son understood hard work. Michael had summer jobs while in school and volunteered at community programs. Jonathan believed that wealth without humility was dangerous. Fortunately, Michael grew into a thoughtful and responsible man. He was intelligent, calm, and respectful toward people regardless of their social status. Instead of simply living off his father's fortune, he worked as a manager in one of Sterling Global's logistics divisions. Jonathan admired his son for that. However, one new development had begun to trouble the billionaire's mind. Michael had fallen deeply in love. Her name was Emily Parker. Emily was 27 and worked as a nurse at St. Matthew's Hospital in Brooklyn. Her life was very different from Michael's. She grew up in a modest apartment with her mother Linda, a devoted school teacher. Her father had died years earlier after a long illness, leaving Emily and her mother to support each other. Emily chose nursing because she wanted to help people during their hardest moments. Her coworkers often described her as the nurse who stayed late even when her shift ended, the one who spoke gently to frighten patients, and the one who refused to treat anyone differently because of their financial situation. Michael met Emily in a strange way. One evening he had a minor car accident during heavy rain. Although the injuries were small, he was taken to St. Matthew's Hospital for examination. Emily was the nurse assigned to check his condition. She spoke to him calmly and kindly, asking simple questions while cleaning the small cut on his forehead. What Michael noticed most was how natural she behaved. She did not recognize his last name or his family's wealth, and she treated him exactly the same way she treated every other patient. That moment stayed with him. They began seeing each other afterward, and over the following months their connection grew deeper. Emily loved Michael's sense of humor and thoughtful nature. Michael admired Emily's compassion and strength. However, Michael had never told her the truth about his background. He drove a modest car and lived in a simple apartment in Manhattan. He told Emily he worked as a project manager for a logistics company. Emily never questioned him. In fact, she often insisted on paying her own share during dates, something that surprised Michael because many women he dated in the past assumed he would cover everything. 6 months later, Michael visited his father at the Sterling estate, a massive mansion overlooking the Hudson River. Marble floors reflected the afternoon sunlight as Michael walked into Jonathan's office. The billionaire sat behind a large wooden desk reading financial reports. Michael stood quietly for a moment before speaking. He told his father he believed Emily was the woman he wanted to marry. Jonathan listened carefully. Marriage was not a small matter to him. Whoever joined their family would become part of something that affected thousands of employees and many communities. Jonathan asked one simple question: did Emily know who Michael really was? Michael shook his head. He explained that he never mentioned his father's fortune or the scale of their business empire. Jonathan leaned back thoughtfully. In his experience, people often behaved differently once money entered the conversation. He had seen friendships change and loyalty disappear the moment wealth became visible. That night Jonathan proposed an unusual idea. He wanted to meet Emily, but not as Jonathan Sterling the billionaire. He wanted to meet her as a poor stranger. Michael stared at his father in disbelief. The idea sounded strange, almost theatrical. But Jonathan insisted that the test would reveal the truth about Emily's heart. After a long discussion, Michael reluctantly agreed. A few days later Jonathan stood in front of a mirror preparing for the test. The elegant businessman disappeared behind worn jeans, an old jacket, and a gray cap. Makeup artists added subtle wrinkles to his face, and he practiced walking with a slight limp. The transformation was astonishing. Instead of a powerful billionaire, the man in the mirror looked like a tired worker who had spent decades struggling through life. Michael watched the transformation with mixed feelings. Part of him felt embarrassed by the plan, yet another part understood his father's reasoning. That same evening Emily finished her shift at the hospital and walked home carrying groceries. The evening air was cool and the city streets were busy. As she approached her apartment building in Brooklyn, she noticed an older man sitting on the sidewalk near the entrance. His clothes looked worn and he held a small bag beside him. Many pedestrians passed without paying attention. Emily slowed down. She approached him and asked if he was all right. The man looked up slowly. It was Jonathan Sterling in disguise. He answered with a tired voice that he had simply had a long day. Emily asked if he had eaten. When he said no, she opened one of her grocery bags and handed him the sandwich she had bought for herself. Jonathan was momentarily speechless. He accepted the food and thanked her quietly. Instead of leaving, Emily sat beside him on the sidewalk and spoke to him gently. She asked if he had a place to sleep that night. Jonathan said he would figure something out. Emily thought for a moment before offering something that shocked him. She said her mother usually cooked too much food and invited him upstairs to share dinner with them. Jonathan hesitated but agreed. Inside the small apartment building, Emily's mother Linda greeted them warmly. Emily introduced Jonathan as Mr. Thomas, explaining that he looked like he needed a meal. Linda immediately welcomed him inside without hesitation. The apartment smelled of homemade soup and warm bread. Photographs of family memories decorated the walls. They all sat at the dining table where Linda served generous portions of food. Emily spoke kindly with Jonathan while asking about his life, believing he was simply a retired worker struggling through difficult circumstances. Soon Michael arrived pretending to be surprised by the guest. Emily introduced him to Mr. Thomas and explained the situation. Michael played along, hiding his nervousness while observing how Emily behaved. Jonathan paid close attention to every moment. Emily never showed embarrassment or impatience toward the poor guest. Instead, she made sure he had enough food and asked if he needed anything else. During the meal, their elderly neighbor Mrs. Alvarez stopped by and was also introduced to Jonathan. She welcomed him warmly like everyone else. Later that night, Emily walked Jonathan downstairs after dinner. He thanked her sincerely for the kindness she had shown. Then he asked an important question. If she discovered her boyfriend Michael was poor, would that change how she felt about him? Emily looked confused by the question and replied that she fell in love with Michael because of who he was, not because of money. Jonathan listened carefully and felt something shift in his heart. The next evening, Michael invited Emily to what he described as a company gathering at his father's house. When Emily arrived at the massive Sterling estate, she was stunned by the luxury surrounding her. Before Michael could explain everything, a familiar voice greeted them. Emily turned and saw Mr. Thomas, but he was no longer wearing worn clothes. Instead, he stood confidently in an elegant suit. Michael then revealed the truth. The poor man she had helped the previous night was actually Jonathan Sterling, one of the richest men in the country. Emily stood silent for several seconds as the truth settled in. Jonathan admitted he had tested her to understand the kind of person his son loved. Michael apologized for participating in the plan. After a moment of disbelief, Emily laughed softly and asked Jonathan if he found the answer he was looking for. Jonathan smiled and said yes. She had treated a stranger with dignity when she believed he had nothing to offer her. That was the character he valued more than any financial achievement. He welcomed her into the Sterling family with genuine respect. Months later, Michael and Emily were married in a beautiful ceremony attended by people from many different backgrounds. Nurses from the hospital sat beside wealthy business leaders. Neighbors from Emily's apartment building shared tables with corporate executives. Jonathan watched the celebration quietly and felt a deep sense of peace. He realized that after decades of building an empire worth billions, the most valuable thing his son had found was not wealth, but a person with a compassionate heart. The lesson was simple but powerful. True character is revealed not in how we treat powerful people, but in how we treat those who appear to have nothing to offer us. And sometimes the greatest treasure a family can gain is not money, but kindness. If you enjoyed this story, make sure you subscribe to the channel for more emotional and inspiring motivational stories.